Hello and welcome. I'm Ben Paris from ansrsource, and I'm here to talk to you about lean methodology and content design. Now, you might have heard about lean methodology. It came through the world of software design, but now that methodology is being used in all kinds of other environments, and one of them is in content design in education. So let's talk about what lean is, what isn't lean, the advantages of lean, and then what you need to do in order to pull it off. First of all, what is lean? Essentially what you're doing when you're using lean methodology is you are creating an initial, very quick, minimally viable product. You want to get something together and then get it out to the users as quickly as possible and then learn from it. So it's not supposed to be perfect, it's not supposed to be the last thing that you'll ever do, but it has to be enough to get good information about what you're trying to do. So that's different from the typical approach. In the typical approach, we try to get everything right. The standard top-down approach was to make every decision up front and then execute those decisions later. Now, for a long time, that was the only reasonable way to do this. You know, if you're packing a whole ship and you're sending it off, to a new continent, you can't afford to experiment with how much fresh water you pack on board. That's the kind of thing you got to get right the first time. You know, if you're printing 100,000 copies of a book, you can't afford to experiment with different font sizes or different kinds of fonts. You need to make the right decision right up front. So for a long time, the technological restrictions that we lived under forced us to try to get everything right up front. But with technology, we're now better able to see what is working and what is not working. And that gave rise to lean methodology. And you can now see some of the advantages of that kind of approach. You know, ideally, you would make every decision right in the first place, but realistically, that doesn't happen. With lean, you can get out in front of the users much more quickly. You don't have to wait until everything gets done. And in addition, you can start reacting much more quickly. You can adapt to user responses. And let's face it, there's some kinds of feedback that you can only get from the users themselves. You know, a bunch of executives sitting around in a room are not going to come up with the right answer, but the users out there, once they start playing with your product, they're going to figure it out. So what you want to do with lean is you want to get something out there, learn from it, and then you have to adapt. If you simply get it out there and it fails, that's not really lean. If you get it out there, adapt, and build something better, that's lean. But doing that isn't quite so easy. You need to have a good group of test audiences, people with very thick skin that are not going to expect perfection, and they have to be representative of your final audience. If your test audience is totally different, then you're going to learn the wrong lessons. Now, after you have that test audience, you need to create a minimally viable product that is in some way representative of what the final thing ought to be. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be some kind of indication. And then you have to learn from the experience. You have to have some way to measure what happened to see what worked and what didn't. And then you adapt. Again, if you only fail, then you're not really being lean, you've just failed. But if you fail and then succeed quickly, then that's what lean is all about. So adapting faster than the market can adapt, that will give you an advantage over your competition. But again, doing that is not so easy. You need a very scalable workforce that can handle this, a very flexible workforce, like ours, that can allow you to turn on a dime. And you also need a culture that can handle that kind of chaos. The top-down design is relatively easy to work with. You make your decisions and you execute. With lean, you're making decisions, you're revising, things are flying around all over the place. And a lot of people can't handle that. But it's more effective in a lot of cases, and you know what? Sometimes it's even more fun.